the world woke up to heartbreak. Robert Redford, not just an actor, not just a director, but a living monument of cinema, is gone. On September 16, 2025, at his serene Sundance home in Utah, the man who defined an era drew his last breath. No flashing cameras, no roaring crowds, just the quiet, unrelenting passage of time claiming one of its most remarkable sons. For 6 decades, Robert Redford wasn't just a star, he was a force that reshaped Hollywood. He gave us Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, and All the President's Men. He won the Oscar for directing Ordinary People and carved Sundance into the beating heart of independent cinema. But this loss feels bigger than the death of a legend. It feels like a monument collapsing. The light that once illuminated generations has dimmed. His passing is not merely a sad footnote, it is the silence after a symphony, the extinguishing of a flame that burned through 5 decades of Hollywood history. And yet, behind the triumphs and the golden glow of fame was a man who carried pain, tragedy, and resilience in equal measure, a man who knew loss long before he knew applause. Long before Robert Redford became the golden boy of Hollywood, he was just a fragile child lying still in a bed, wondering if he would ever walk again. Born August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, he was raised in modest circumstances while America was still shaking off the Great Depression. But when he was just 10 years old, fate struck its first cruel blow. Polio. The disease that terrified a generation gripped his small body, locking his legs in paralysis. The air reeked of disinfectant, the weight of blankets felt unbearable, and every attempt to move was a silent battle between hope and despair. But his mother, Martha, refused to surrender her boy to fate. Night after night, she massaged his rigid legs, whispering courage into rooms heavy with fear. It was there, in that stillness, that Redford first learned resilience. Not as a word, but as a way of surviving. By the late 1940s, he recovered, but he was restless, angry, and searching for a place where he belonged. Los Angeles offered temptation and trouble. He fell into a rough crowd, reckless nights that nearly derailed his future. One night, a run-in with the police ended with only a stern warning, but the moment became a mirror. He was staring at a path that could have ruined him. Instead, he turned inward, sketching worlds on paper, losing himself under open skies, finding solace in tennis courts where he warmed up legendary champion Pancho Gonzalez. There, Redford discovered a spark, proof that he could rise above the invisible verdict life had once tried to write for him. But fate wasn't finished testing him. Its next strike would be far more devastating. If polio had scarred Robert Redford's body, the next tragedy would scar his soul forever. In 1955, when he was just 18, the anchor of his young life, his mother, Martha, went into the hospital for what was meant to be a routine surgery. She never came home. What began as hope ended in infection, and the light of Robert's world was suddenly gone. For the only son she left behind, the loss was absolute. Their home in Van Nuys became a hollow shell, every room echoing with absence. His father, Charles, never remarried. There were no words, no consolations, only a grieving man and a boy who had just crossed into adulthood through a door of unbearable silence. Redford later admitted that this was the moment the ground beneath him gave way. Childhood collapsed in an instant. He carried the silence with him for years, through triumphs and through the blinding lights of fame. It left me with a silence I could never fill, he said, and that silence haunted every step of his journey. Trying to numb the pain, Redford threw himself into extremes. A sports scholarship to the University of Colorado briefly lifted him, making him feel 10 feet tall, but heavy drinking soon stripped it away. Packing his bags in shame, he left school behind. For many, this would have been the breaking point. But instead of surrendering, Robert Redford chose exile over despair. He wandered across Europe, France, Spain, Italy, painting, sketching, drinking in the landscapes until the noise inside him finally softened. This crucible of grief and wandering forged something new in him, a stubborn, steel-hard determination that he would not be defeated by pain. When Robert Redford returned from Europe in the late 1950s, he was no longer just a drifting young man. He was scarred, but sharpened. Carrying nothing but brushes, sketchbooks, and a quiet vow to start over, he stepped into New York City, a place that could crush or crown you. The streets were narrow, wet with rain, and buzzing with ambition. He didn't have the brash confidence of youth anymore, only the heavy determination of someone who had survived too much to turn back now. He first enrolled at Pratt Institute to study painting, clutching canvases as if they were lifelines. But something inside him kept whispering there was more. Almost on a dare to himself, he enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Acting wasn't a lightning strike of revelation, it was a brutal climb. At 24, he scraped together rent money by taking small TV roles, The Twilight Zone, Maverick, Perry Mason, anything that kept him in the game. Each line he delivered was not just dialogue, but proof to himself that he had not surrendered. Yet Hollywood's first reaction to him was cruel. Casting directors took one look at his golden hair and flawless symmetry and dismissed him. Too pretty, they said. Too polished to be taken seriously. The boy who had once fought to be seen as more than frail now faced a new invisible battle, to be seen as more than a face. Then came 1963. Broadway. Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park. Redford, cast as the young husband, finally had a stage where he could unleash what had been burning beneath the surface. Night after night, critics and audiences saw it, not just a handsome man, but a gifted actor. Broadway was just the spark. What followed was the fire. Hollywood came calling, and Robert Redford answered. First with small film roles, then with performances that turned him into a household name. Then came the role that would immortalize him, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. His Sundance Kid wasn't just a character, it was a cultural moment, sly, brilliant, and unforgettable. Suddenly, Redford wasn't just working. He was shining. The 1970s belonged to him. The sting made him the world's most bankable star. The Way We Were with Barbra Streisand turned him into the face of a generation's romantic longing. And then came All the President's Men, where Redford stepped into the shoes of Bob Woodward and turned journalism into a cinematic thriller, reminding America why truth mattered. But even at the summit, Redford felt the chains. Fame was not freedom, it was a cage of golden bars. The very face that millions adored was a double-edged sword. Directors still whispered that he was too pretty to be taken seriously. Critics waited for him to fail. And when The Great Gatsby underperformed, it felt like the knives came out, as though the so-called golden boy wasn't allowed to falter even once. Instead of retreating, Redford doubled down. He began seeking heavier, riskier work, films that challenged audiences, that traded easy entertainment for truth. He refused to be just a star. He wanted to be an artist. That hunger became the hidden engine of his career, driving him toward a decision that would silence the doubters forever. He would step behind the camera and seize control of the stories himself. When Robert Redford stepped behind the camera for the first time, the industry held its breath. Many doubted him. Could the golden boy of Hollywood truly direct? Was he more than just a perfect face? The whispers were cruel, but Redford ignored them. What he created was Ordinary People, 1980, a film so piercing, so intimate, that it shattered the silence around grief and family tragedy. It won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director. For Redford, that Oscar was not just a trophy, it was vindication. It was the moment he proved to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he was not just a star but a storyteller with vision and depth. But Redford's ambition went beyond proving himself. He wanted to build something bigger, a place for other voices, voices that Hollywood ignored. In 1981, he planted a fragile seed in the mountains of Utah, Sundance. What started as a risky experiment, part workshop, part festival, became the beating heart of independent cinema. Sundance was not just a stage for new filmmakers. It was a rebellion. Redford fought tooth and nail to keep its soul intact, even when money, corporate interest, and commercial pressures threatened to swallow it whole. Friends warned him he was risking too much, sacrificing peace, time, even fortune. But he carried it forward, not for himself, but for every artist who had once been dismissed, just as he had been dismissed years earlier. This was Robert Redford's quiet revolution. He gave independent film a home, turning his personal struggle into an open door for thousands of dreamers. And in doing so, he became more than a movie star. He became a guardian of storytelling itself. To the world, Robert Redford was untouchable, a man of effortless charm and golden charisma. But behind the camera flashes and applause was a life marked by heartbreak. In 1958, before the world knew his name, Redford married Lola Van Wagenen, a brilliant and steady presence who became his anchor. Their early years were stripped of glamour, borrowed furniture, small apartments. Late-night whispers of hope when money was scarce. It was a love forged in fire, a fragile sanctuary they believed could withstand any storm. But storms came. Their first child, Scott, lived only a few weeks. The nursery they had prepared fell silent, and Redford was left carrying the unbearable weight of a father who could not save his son. Years later he would admit, "You never really heal. You just learn to live around the loss." Hope returned when their son James, known as Jamie, was born, but his life would be marked by hospitals, surgeries, and a lifetime of illness. For decades, Redford lived a double life, the world's leading man by day, a father keeping vigil by night. He traveled with scripts to hospital rooms, whispering lines under his breath while gripping his son's hand, promising him that tomorrow would come. When Jamie passed away in 2020 at 58 after a long battle with cancer, Redford, now an old man himself, was shattered. The loss reopened the wound left by Scott decades earlier, as though fate had circled back to strike him again. Through it all, Lola remained by his side for 27 years, shielding their children from the chaos of fame. But in 1985, even their marriage could no longer carry the weight of time, distance, and grief. The split was quiet, without scandal, but for Redford it felt like the collapse of his last sanctuary. Some bonds in Robert Redford's life were not just friendships, they were lifelines. Among them, none shaped him more deeply than Natalie Wood and Paul Newman. Natalie came first, in the early 1960s, when both were still young actors trying to survive Hollywood's glare. They starred together in Inside Daisy Clover and This Property is Condemned, and what began as a professional pairing became something more intimate, not romantic, but a sibling-like trust. Natalie saw the vulnerable man behind the perfect face, and she believed in him before the critics did. Then, in 1981, tragedy struck. Natalie drowned under mysterious circumstances at just 43. To the world, it was another Hollywood headline. To Redford, it was like a light being extinguished. He rarely spoke about her death, but those who knew him said it left a shadow over him, a reminder that even the brightest lights can vanish without warning. Paul Newman was different. From the moment they filmed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid together, they were more than co-stars, they were brothers. They raced cars, played pranks, shared drinks, and confided in each other about the strange loneliness of fame. Paul's laughter was the medicine that cut through Redford's darkest days. But time was merciless once again. Newman's health declined as lung cancer took hold. Redford visited when he could, forced to watch as the man who had once been unstoppable faded before his eyes. When Newman died in 2008, Redford said simply, "There's a hole in my life now." It was not a statement for the press, it was a confession. Natalie and Newman remained with him until the end, ghosts he carried like talismans, reminders of love, loss, and the fragility of every bond. After decades of carrying storms, Robert Redford finally found a place where the world's noise could not follow him. In the late 1990s, he met Sibylle Sagers, a German-born artist whose life was measured not in premieres or headlines, but in colors, brushstrokes, and silence. She was nothing like Hollywood, and that was exactly what he needed. With Sibylle, Redford was no longer Robert Redford the icon. He was simply a man, weathered and scarred, but still standing. Their love was not a fevered spark but a slow, steady fire, the kind that doesn't burn out. Together, they built a partnership rooted in art and nature, creating The Way of the Rain, an immersive performance piece that blended painting, music, and storytelling to honor the Earth's fragile beauty. By the time they married in 2009, Redford was 73 and no longer chasing stardom. "It feels like a new life," he said simply, and he meant it. For the first time in decades, he had found a love that did not demand that he be a legend, a savior, or a symbol. In Sibylla's presence, Redford discovered stillness. Healing, he realized, was not the absence of scars but the ability to carry them without bleeding. The man who had once wandered Europe searching for peace had finally found it in his own home. Their life in Santa Fe was simple, surrounded by desert sky and open silence. No red carpets, no cameras, just two people who had weathered the storms of their pasts and chose to walk forward together. For Robert Redford, this was not just love. It was redemption, a final act of grace before the curtain would one day fall. September 16, 2025. In the quiet of his Sundance home, under the vast Utah sky he had loved and protected, Robert Redford's long journey came to an end. There were no flashing cameras, no applause, only the hush of inevitability as he exhaled one last time. For the world, the news was a shock. For his family, it was devastation. Sibylla, his anchor in the final decades, was left clutching the keepsakes that still held his touch, the scarf with his scent, the sketches he had left unfinished, the chair by the window that would never again hold him. His children and grandchildren wept, not for a Hollywood icon, but for the man who had been their father, their grandfather, the scarred but steady presence at the center of their world. Headlines called it the end of an era. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, presidents, and fans. But in that Utah house, mourning was intimate, quiet, and unphotographed. Every room echoed with him, and without him. Yet, even in death, Redford's presence endures. His films still blaze across screens, his voice still echoes in the festival he built, his spirit still lingers in every dreamer who dares to create. Robert Redford's greatest achievement was never his fame. It was his refusal to let pain define him. He turned wounds into wisdom, grief into art, silence into a voice for others. The curtain has fallen, but his echo will not fade. It lives in the filmmakers he inspired, in the audiences he moved, in every heart that chooses to keep going despite the storms. Robert Redford may be gone, but the light he carried now belongs to all of us.